Welcome everybody to Sunday mornings at the Marxist Library. This is a weekly program originating out of Oakland, California, previously based at the Nebel Proctor Marxist Library, but we've been on Zoom since 2020, 2021, I think it is, as part of the, in response to the COVID pandemic. Every Sunday morning, we have a variety of programs on different topics. You're welcome to go to our website at ICSSmarx.org, sign up for email notifications for future programs, view past programs, and send us a message with your ideas for suggestions for speakers, topics, and programs that you'd like to see. Again, I'd like to welcome everybody. We have a special emergency meeting today, an open discussion on the crisis in Gaza. What we're going to be doing today is having presentations, four short presentations with some background on what's going on in the crisis, and we're going to open it up for discussion. Everybody in the second half to present your ideas, questions. Unlike our typical programs today, what we're going to be doing is it's going to be a group discussion. So after the presentations, everybody will get a chance to express your opinions. You can comment on other people's questions and comments. This is more of a group discussion than a presentation followed by Q&A to the speakers, although you're welcome to ask them questions too about their presentations. Before we begin, I just want to remind you of a couple of things. First of all, I want to remind you that we want to respect each other. This is a very hot topic. Respect each other, listen to each other, comment on each other's opinions, raise questions, show respect to the moderator, and let's make this a productive discussion on an extremely important topic. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is turn it over to the first of our speakers. And Roger, if you want to go ahead and get started, you can share your screen and go for do your presentation. Roger, see here? Roger got dropped off. Oh boy. Okay.
Unmute him. Unmute him. Yes.
Unmute okay, hold on. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
Still cannot do it. Still cannot do it.
Yeah. Okay. Hold on. Go ahead, Roger. Sorry.
Thank you, Alan, and thank you for unmuting me about 5 minutes. So I'm Roger Harris, a longtime person involved with the library, and I'm on the program committee. But the comments I'm going to make are very brief, and they're going to be my comments and my opinions entirely. I don't represent the program committee here. I wanted to talk to the framing of the question. The title of this gathering here is The Crisis in Gaza. And I think that is absolutely the correct title for this. A crisis, but first let me explain why I think the framing of the question is so important. Sometimes the way you pose a question gets you the answer that you want. And the classic example of that would be that old canard, have you stopped beating your spouse? And if you answer yes, that means that you continue to beat your spouse. And if you answer no, it means that you had beaten your spouse. So it's how you frame the question is important. Framing the question as the crisis in Gaza was the correct, in my opinion, framing of this question, because it is indeed a crisis. There's been accumulating contradictions in Gaza, and they had to pop. And they popped on October 7th. And that's what happened. It was a crisis that the conditions could not continue the way they are. I wanted to talk about what I would think would be an incorrect title for this thing. And the Zionists have characterized this as a war. That, I think, is an incorrect title, and why it's an incorrect title, what ideological baggage that includes. I'll quote first Caitlin Johnston, the blogger, and she says, "This is not a war. It's an enclosed shooting range with military explosives and human targets. It's not a quest for peace. It's the quest for peace is long ago gone. It's like saying that the white settler state of the United States has achieved peace with its indigenous population. That is not a peace. That is a massacre. Two, it's not a question of Jews versus Arabs. Many Jews, myself included, are anti-Zionist and have always been anti-Zionist. And it is certainly not a war against Hamas, as the Zionist state states. It is a question. It is a collective punishment of an entire population, a crime against humanity by international law, and it's asymmetrical. To characterize it as a Palestine-Israel war is incorrect. We have homemade gliders and handguns versus a $23.2 billion military budget of a nuclear-armed country. So, two final points. One is we should not make a false equivalence between, there are two sides in this conflict, but we should not look at that falsely as each side is equivalent. This is a clear example of victim and victimizer. And two, and most important for us who live in the belly of the beast, it is not simply a Israeli project. This is a project of U.S. imperialism. And we should always connect Zionism with imperialism. The two are, in fact, joined at the hips. The imperialist project and the Zionist project are inseparable. So with those points made, I would like to give you a little bit of a slideshow on some of the local resistance to the tragedy that is unfolding now. I'm going to share my screen, and I am going to find, let's see, I think this will do it. Yes. So is the screen shared and working?
Yeah, we could see your screen, Roger. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So this has to do with the rally that took place last Thursday. Last Thursday, when people got off work in San Francisco on October 19, the street in front of the federal building in San Francisco swelled with a spirited crowd chanting, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." An ocean of demonstrators had stopped traffic at home, and while Homeland Security police looked on, and a helicopter hovered above. With
Roger, you're not showing any. You're showing the list of slides, but not a given slide. Is that it? Click on the window with the slide. Share the slides.
I am, but let me.
So right now we're just seeing. We're seeing about.
You're still seeing it?
We're seeing a list of slides, thumbnails, but not the slides themselves. Did you want to go through the slides?
I'll stop sharing and start over.
Yeah.
Again.
Okay.
I thought I had done that.
Yeah, go ahead and share your desktop and then select a slide and then just file through them.
Okay. Let's see. Is that achieved it?
We have screen sharing. There you go. Now we've got it. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, great. My screen is different from yours. So
yeah,
in less than 24 hours notice, the all-out Gaza emergency protest amassed 2,000 to 3,000 people demanding an end to the siege on Gaza and an immediate cessation of U.S. aid to Israel. Organizers include Al Awada, the Arab Resource and Organizing Center, Jewish Voice for Peace, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, Palestine Youth Movement, Workers' World, and others. These two local Lowell high school students in San Francisco, both Palestinians, had just led a national student strike. they spoke eloquently and movingly to the enthusiastic crowd.
Okay, so we're just seeing one slide right now. I think
Right.
actually why don't you pull it together? Let's move on. We can come back to these later. Okay.
Let me just do it another way then. Let me just try one more thing. Okay,
We'll come back to it. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So next up is Janet. You're unmuted, so you go right ahead and give your talk.
Hey, thank you. And thank you, Roger. I think there were up to 10,000 people out in the streets in Brooklyn yesterday, and thousands in Paris, and anyway, all over. Hi, everyone. I'm going to be talking about some of my own experiences, some history, and also what's currently happening. I began my Palestine solidarity work in February 2008 when I learned about the Free Gaza Movement Project, FGM, to sail 2 small fishing boats with a total of 46 passengers and crew into Gaza in a nonviolent direct action to break Israel's illegal siege of Gaza by sea in order to open up a sea lane so that the people of Gaza could exercise their international right to trade in the commercial seaways. I was inexplicably drawn to this project and was invited to become part of the organizing team, even though I had little knowledge of the Palestinian struggle or the situation in Gaza at the time. I soon learned that Israel controls Gaza by land, sea, and airspace. One might wonder why there is never any news about people flying in or out of Gaza. That's because Israel did what Israel is wont to do. It bombed the radar station and control tower of Gaza's one airport in December 2001, and bulldozers cut the runway in January 2002, rendering the airport inoperable. And Israel not only bombs Gaza by air from time to time to mow the grass, an Israeli strategy, and I can't remember who came up with it, but the IDF also flies drones over Gaza 24/7. Note that the Palestine Liberation Movement calls the IDF the IOF, the Israeli Occupation Force, rather than the Israeli Defense Force. Those FGM boats made it into Gaza on August 23rd, 2008. Donna Wallach, who sometimes joins these Zoom events, was one of the passengers. There were more successful FGM voyages, but they came to a stop in December 2008 when a full Israeli naval blockade was put in place just prior to the 22-day-long Operation Cast Lead in 2008 to 2009. The FGM effort was the model for what eventually became the Freedom Flotillas. And those of us who have been involved in this aspect of breaking the siege of Gaza call them the boat projects. I was a passenger on the 2010 Gaza Freedom Flotilla. We never made it into Gaza. Another strategy to liberate the Palestinian people is the BDS movement, and there are other efforts, some organized by internationals and diaspora Palestinians, while others are organized from within Israel and occupied Palestine. Zionism, the ideology of building a Jewish state that would be democratic, but only for its Jewish citizens, started in the late 1800s, which eventually led to Palestine, a land without a people for a people without a land, to be the target location. And what some Zionist zealots have had in mind is something called the Greater Israel that includes Jordan and Syria. Going now into some historical highlights, British Mandate Palestine was part of the spoils of World War I. In 1920, the Zionist socialist, an oxymoron in my opinion, Histadrut labor organization, which included Palestinians, which excluded Palestinians, was formed in Palestine and also advocated for boycotting Arab stores and goods. Steve Zeltzer can tell us more about this at some point. Between 1921 and 1923, following pogroms against Jews in Europe, some 40,000 Ukrainian Jews made their way to British Mandate Palestine as settlers and colonizers. And over the decades, more and more Jews emigrated from other countries with the help of the British. The Zionist project began arming itself inside Palestine. And in 1947-1948, they violently threw the British out, forcefully displaced and slaughtered Palestinians, 700 of whom were driven into Gaza, while others fled to other countries and became refugees, stole the land and property of the Palestinians, and declared statehood as Israel. This is known as the Nakba, the catastrophe. And as NYU professor Andrew Ross discusses in his 2019 book titled Stone Men, the Palestinians Who Built Israel, Palestinian labor, especially the skilled stoneworkers, although oppressed, played a fundamental role in building the state of Israel. In 1967, the military occupations began with the Six-Day War, when Israel captured and occupied the Golan Heights from Syria, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, from Jordan, and the Gaza Strip and the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt, after which Israel began engaging in home demolitions of Palestinians in the occupied territories using Caterpillar bulldozers. Recently, Israel has required Bedouins in the Negev to demolish their own homes, and if they don't comply, Israel bills them when they do it. One can certainly look at the bombing of the edifices in Gaza as part of Israel's home demolition project. In 1973, there was the Yom Kippur War, which led to the 1978 Camp David Accords, and Sinai was returned to Egypt. Then there were the Oslo Accords in 1993, which haven't gone anywhere in 20 years. Apartheid laws were enacted, and the illegal border walls and checkpoints. A security fence was built around Israel, by Israel around Gaza in 1994, and Israel started building the West Bank apartheid wall, or separation barrier, as Israel calls it, in 2002. The people of Gaza suffered from severe food insecurity, which they have endured for more than 2 decades. In 2007, Israel began the siege of Gaza when the 2006 Palestinian elections didn't go as they had hoped and planned. And over the decades, Israel has been continuing to build Jewish settlements, mostly in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. They are violent in nature and eat away at Palestinian land. One can't help but consider that Israel would be more than happy to destroy all the edifices in Gaza and turn it into a big parking lot, making the land ripe to fill it with settlements. Palestinians have tried using nonviolence to stop Zionists from taking over their land, going back to the 1920s. But every time Palestinians use nonviolent tactics, they are always met with violence from the Zionists. Think of the 2018 Great March of Return, a nonviolent action met with snipers' bullets that killed and wounded many participating Palestinians, even though Palestinians have a legal right of return based on Resolution 194, passed by the UN General Assembly in 1948. One is reminded of something Stokely Carmichael said. and I quote, Dr. King's policy was, if you are nonviolent, if you suffer, your opponent will see your suffering and will be moved to change his heart. That's very good. He only made one fallacious assumption. In order for nonviolence to work, your opponent must have a conscience. The United States has none, end quote. And I will add, Israel has none either. The Palestinian Authority, the body the international community recognizes as the official representative of Palestinians in the state of Palestine as a non-member observer state in the UN, has pretty much lost its legitimacy among Palestinians. The PA is considered corrupt and has basically been maintaining the occupation on behalf of Israel, kind of like the Jewish collaborators in concentration camps during World War II. Now, you may not be aware, but on December 3rd, 1982, UN General Assembly passed Resolution 3743 that included a clause that says that the UN General Assembly, quote, reaffirms the legitimacy of the struggle of peoples for independence, territorial integrity, national unity, and liberation from colonial or foreign domination and foreign occupation by all available means, including armed struggle, end quote. The October 7th military offensive and what followed came from within Gaza, and history led to this. And as renowned Israeli expatriate and historian Ilan Pappé reminded us on Thursday night when he spoke in Berkeley, quote, history doesn't start on the day of an event, end quote. It might be seen as Palestinian militants having reached their boiling point, as Roger had kind of referred to, and it doesn't have anything to do with the religion of the people who stole their land. They just want to return home to their land, which is their right. Hamas and its military arm have been identified as the culprits, but they are likely getting help from the outside somehow. I, for one, don't know exactly what is actually behind it. The offensive is sometimes referred to as Al-Aqsa flood because of the latest Israeli raid on the Al-Aqsa Mosque in East Jerusalem. On the other hand, there are some who believe that the primary objective of the military operation is a prisoner of war exchange. Israel is holding thousands of Palestinian prisoners for years. Regardless, one might look at this military offensive as a battle for liberation, an application of the UN General Assembly resolution clause I read earlier, making it perfectly legal. Now, a question of whether the Israeli captives are actually prisoners of war and should be treated as such, and the possible war crimes committed by the Gaza militants has come up. Norman Finkelstein, the son of Holocaust survivors, has a different angle on the matter. Most of what follows of Finkelstein's take on Gaza is from a 3-hour conversation he had with Katie Halper on October 16th. Finkelstein talked about the conservative Prime Minister David Cameron calling Gaza an open-air prison. One of Israel's eminent sociologists, Baruch Kimmerling from the Hebrew University, described Gaza as the largest concentration camp ever. Then Finkelstein starts asking important questions to consider. He talked about Ken Roth, former head of Human Rights Watch, having written an article in which he called Hamas a, quote, military dictatorship, end quote. Finkelstein asked Roth rhetorically, if it is a military dictatorship, can you hold the civilian population accountable for the acts of that military dictatorship? Finkelstein also sees what Israel is doing as genocide. He talked about Israel's defenders who say Israel has the right to self-defense, which he disagrees with because Israel is the oppressor. And since Israel's president, Isaac Herzog, admits it's not a war on Hamas, that Israel has the right to target anybody in Gaza, every man, woman, and child. If he is being literal, Herzog is holding the 1.3 million children of Gaza, most of whom were not alive to have voted for Hamas in 2006, accountable and legitimate targets for extermination. Finkelstein points out that that's what no water, no fuel, no food, and no electricity means. Finkelstein continues by saying, Operation Protective Edge lasted 51 days. If what Netanyahu is saying is correct, we're talking about no water, no fuel, no food, and no electricity for a lot more than 51 days. So how could anyone dispute that that's not a plan for genocide? And also, according to Finkelstein, if you claim that Israel has the right to self-defense, one should ask, do the Palestinians have the right to free themselves from the largest concentration camp ever, comparing it to the Warsaw Ghetto uprising in 1943? Do the inmates of a concentration camp have the right to break free? And in answer to the question of whether concentration camp guards have the right to self-defense, Finkelstein says no. He continues, if you don't dispute that horrible things happened on October 7th, you also have to make a moral judgment. Should the Gaza militants be condemned for what happened? Finkelstein looked at what the white abolitionists had to say after Nat Turner's rebellion. Frederick Douglass and W.B. Du Bois held white abolitionists in very high regard. For guidance, Finkelstein looked at William Lloyd Garrison's reaction to the Nat Turner rebellion. Nat Turner was a slave and a religious zealot, believing his actions were guided by God. He gave the order to kill all whites. There was an orgy of violence. Garrison, in The Liberator, expressed his opinion, formulating what Finkelstein considers a proper moral judgment about how Americans treated the slaves. Garrison did not condemn the revolt, even though he believed it was not justifiable, but he made no moral judgment on the excesses of the slaves who revolted. He instead made one on the perpetrators of slavery. Quote, immediate emancipation can alone save her from the vengeance of heaven and cancel the debt of ages, end quote. And he left no space for the mourners of Nat Turner's victims. They had asked for what they got. Using this as an analogy to the Gaza offensive, Finkelstein concludes that there should be no tears for the Israeli victims of October 7th. He also adds that one of the things the militants were doing was avenging all the horrors they and their families had endured for over 20 years. They were saying, if we're going to die, we're going to take some of them with us. This offensive operation goes beyond Israel now. What was started by Palestinian fighters has put the whole region off balance, has disturbed and disrupted the entire area, and may even affect international economy. Palestine is no longer irrelevant. Pape reminded us that the struggle for liberation is one thing, what will come after is another. I'll close by saying we must take our lead from the Palestinians, just as we should from any oppressed people. We of white European descent have no right to judge how an oppressed people should liberate themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Next is Sharon. So Sharon, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Janet. I would like to go back in history and just put the history of Palestine in a broader context. So people have been saying in the last few weeks different things about when this started. So some people say it's more than 100 years. And what they're referring to is the mandate, the quote, mandate that Britain got to rule or administer Palestine after the fall of the Ottoman Empire in World War I. Some people say it's 75 years. Well, that refers to the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. And some people say 56 years of oppression, and that refers to 1967, when Israel captured the Gaza Strip from Egypt in the so-called Six-Day War. All of those are true, but it's confusing when we don't elaborate on what we're talking about when we use a number like 100 or 75 or 56. So how did 2.5 million people end up in an open-air prison, which it surely is? The Ottoman Empire lasted for about 600 years, and Gaza city was a place in that empire for most of those 600 years. It had its ups and downs. One source I read said when the Crusaders got there, it was a mess. It had deteriorated in some way. And I haven't studied that history close enough to know the truth about that. But before 1948, there were about 80,000 Palestinians who lived in Gaza. And there were some Zionist settlers from the 30s and 20s, 30s, and 40s, as Janet talked about, but Gaza itself was not a destination for the Zionist settlements. In general, the Zionists who imported people, who facilitated people coming to Palestine, were more interested in farming in the Galilee and the growth of Tel Aviv and Haifa and other Jewish enclaves or focuses of settlement. But there were some Jews living in Gaza. In 1948, after the vote for partition in the United Nations, a war ensued because the Arab states refused to accept that partition, and the so-called Palestinian state that was supposed to happen, be established in the West Bank. In the course of that war, between 500,000 and 700,000 Palestinians were driven out of their homes, and about 250,000 ended up in Gaza. Now, we should think about what a refugee camp is. There are still 8 refugee camps in Gaza, but all the people who were driven into Lebanon, Gaza, the West Bank, Jordan, and Syria, initially, all of them lived in refugee camps. And that meant literally camps with tents that were supplied by various agencies. And then the UNRWA was established. And that's very important to understand the role that the United Nations agency UNRWA played. I'm going back to my notes here, sorry. So UNRWA, which stands for United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees in the Near East, is the only UN agency and the only agency dealing with refugees that is targeted to a specific population. It's separate from the United Nations High Commission on Refugees, which helps many refugees from many other countries. UNRWA is the only one that serves the Palestinians, period. And they had a large role that initially they played a large role in establishing the camps. And up until this day, they, as you know from watching what's going on in Gaza and people fleeing to UNRWA schools, they run a lot of the social services and the social services agencies in the wherever the Palestinians are, including Gaza. Now, not all of the refugee camps are still tents. When I was in Beirut in 1970, and also in Jordan, and I visited some of the camps, and they were terrible places of squalor, let me say, where people struggled to have clean water. There was running sewage running in the middle of the streets, if there were streets. That has somewhat changed, but there are still many camps where people live literally in canvas houses. In Beirut, some of the so-called camps have more developed into apartment complexes. If you drive by, you'd see it you just see, you know, people living in very, very close quarters in apartments. But we should not forget that 75 years later, people are still living in canvas houses. There is a good book written by Norman Finkelstein, who Janet quoted at length. It's called Gaza, An Inquest into Its Martyrdom. It's relatively new. I think it was copyrighted in 2018. And he's talking about the 5 so-called wars that Israel fought against Gaza over the last, since the year 2000, roughly. And of course, Roger is right. They weren't wars. They were bombardments. I refuse to use the word airstrike. It's a euphemism. We're talking about bombs and the deaths of thousands of people. I just want to say a few words about what Americans are taught about history. So when the United States supported the partition of Palestine, Truman was heard to say, well, there's no Arab vote, or where's the Arab vote? He was referring to the fact that there was a Jewish vote, but there were other motivations for the U.S. foreign policy, or the U.S. administration, to support the establishment of Israel. It gave United States imperialism a foothold in the Levant, in the Eastern Mediterranean. None of that is taught in our schools. And I went back and I looked at the two books that I have that try to set the record straight about US history. One is the famous People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn. It's a huge volume. I recommend people have it as a reference. It's very good. It talks about imperialism. It talks about it's in chronological order, and it talks about the massacres and the genocide against the Native Americans. There is not one word in this book about the establishment of the Jewish state. There's not one word in this book about Palestine. Then I looked at this book, which is shorter and more, it's not so chronological, it's more a whole essay. Lies My Teacher Told Me by James Lowen. It's a very good book. He emphasizes racism, the history of racism in the United States. It's an excellent book. There is not one word about the establishment of the state of Israel. If I hadn't set my son straight when he was in high school, he would have come away believing that Israel is the ancient homeland of the Jewish people. He would have thought that my family must have originated there because all Jews have that as their homeland. So there are recently attempts to change the curriculum here in California. I don't know in other places. The Arab community has struggled hard to change the history curriculum and set the record straight. And there's been fights about it in the education department of California Education Department. Of course, it spills over into political struggle. I think they've made some progress recently. I think
Maybe
I'll
wrap up a little bit.
I think
there.
I'll stop there. There's a lot more to learn about the history of Zionism and its hold on the United States. Let me just say that one more thing, if I can find it on my notes. Yes. So Truman wanted to know where there was no Arab vote, right? Where was the Arab vote? In 1940, the Jewish population of the United States was around 5 million. And today it's around 7.5 million. In 1940, there were estimated 350,000 Arabs, people of Arab origin, living in the United States. Today, there are 3.5 million Arab Americans. So the Arab vote is increasing rapidly compared to other ethnicities, which can only be a good thing. I'll stop right there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. So next is Raj. This will be the last presentation. So Raj, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Ellen, and thanks all those who have spoken ahead of me, and they've covered a lot of ground. So I will try to keep it to a few points. One thing I do want to add to, which is whether Hamas's attack on Israel was terrorism. And if it was terror, is it morally justified or was it immoral? So the great achievement of Hamas is that it caught the Israeli defense and security agencies off guard. It busted the myth of Israeli power. It has also exposed the internal contradictions of an artificial society that is Israel, and therefore its inherent weaknesses. That's its achievement. On 7 October, The military offensive of Hamas, led by Hamas, had 5 organizations. It wasn't just Hamas fighters, 2 of which were Marxists, PFLP and DFLP. That's Democratic Front for Liberation of Palestine. It also included Fatah fighters, which is Palestinian PLO based. In past 15 years conflict, 308 Israelis had died and 6,407 Palestinians had died, a ratio of 1 to 20. Why? Israeli Air Force, which has modern bombers, American-made. Palestinians don't. How then Hamas, representing Palestinians, is supposed to fight Israel? As of yesterday, Israeli casualties, both dead and wounded, combined are around 6,500. And Palestinian casualties are around 20,000. This is a ratio of 1 to 3, but Israel is not yet done. It's continuing to bomb as we talk. Israel survives on complete military and economic dominance over the Palestinians to keep the stolen land, water, and other resources to maintain a settler colonial state. The 7 October military offensive by Hamas that killed 1,000 Israeli settlers and 200 taken prisoners in that attack is morally justified, in my opinion, just as Finkelstein has pointed out, and Janet told us about that. Terror was used as a tactic, we don't deny it, but it was a political act. Why? Because Gaza is being strangled to death slowly. It has 50% unemployment rate. 7 October was like the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising of 1943 during the Second World War, when the oppressed Jews revolted. And they were doomed, and most of them died. I give an older example from India. In 1857 revolt, led by Indian soldiers of the British Army, laid siege to the British Residency building in my hometown. It's a multi-story building in my hometown of Lucknow. All the British families living in the city in individual homes had moved into this huge multi-story administrative building when threatened by the Indian revolt. Indian rebels then laid siege to the British Residency. Despite attempts to relieve those trapped inside British building, the siege lasted for 87 days and ended in defeat for the British with 2,500 deaths. Almost everybody, men, women, and children, were killed. Sir Henry Lawrence, the commanding British officer, died of his wounds. Hundreds of Indian soldiers loyal to the British defending the Residency also died. Rebel Indian attackers also died. We don't have the number. The revolt against British in India eventually failed. The British exacted a terrible toll, killing tens of thousands later, but it shook the foundations of the British colonial control of India. We in India celebrate that incident as an act of liberation. Another parallel to this incident is a rebellion in the British colonized India also of 1930 this time, where a school teacher in the port city of Chittagong, now in Bangladesh, organized students aged 14 to 18 who raided the armory, looted the guns, and went on a military offensive against the British. The act employed terror. One of their targets was the European Club, but because it was Easter Sunday, the club was closed, and the attack did not succeed. Had it not been the case, the rebels undoubtedly would have killed, wounded, and taken European prisoners, men, women, and children. The British declared this group terrorists, just like they are declaring Hamas as terrorists. But in India, they are celebrated as liberators, as the Hamas should be also in this case. And this is regardless of ideology of Hamas, which is conservative Islam. Another old example in the US is the raid on the Federal Armory. And since Netrunner rebellion was mentioned, I will not go into it. Now, Israel and US have a mutual dependency, which as Sharon pointed out, in 67 war, using superior air power, Israel destroyed Arab forces. Its leaders thought that they will become a proxy of the US and that will guarantee safety of its immigrant European citizens of Jewish faith, Jewish ethnicity and faith. But by becoming a US proxy, Israel is forever to remain European settler colonial occupiers, incapable of living in peace, forever dependent on the US for its survival. Conversely, the US, by putting Israeli interest as its own, has bound itself to Israel's racist apartheid regime. Israel lobby ensures that media and government remain loyal to Israel. But as Sharon has pointed out, things are changing, and young people in the United States no longer accept this kind of relationship, the colonial relationship, a racist colonial relationship. But I want to talk more about the context of all this conflict now, global context. And the context is US decline of power, unipolarity shifting to multipolarity. The US global power is in sharp decline in the current stage of its capitalism, the imperialist stage, a stage in which there is too much capital accumulated, that is dead labor. So it tends to lower overall profit rate. And unlike the 1914 to 45 period, where 2 world wars occurred, excess capital can't be destroyed by world wars. Nuclear weapons could end life on the planet. Export of capital to China under neoliberalism helped lift profit rate for 20 years, but the Great Recession showed there is no escape. Because of neoliberal capital exports, the productive US economy has weakened. Today, 2/3 of US workers survive paycheck to paycheck doing basically jobs that don't pay enough. New powerful actors on the world stage have appeared since 1991 and who want US global power curbed. And US global power is destructive. China, Russia on a global stage, Iran and Saudi Arabia in the Middle East, India and South Asia, South Africa and Africa, Brazil and South America. Their economic association, BRICS, has admitted 6 other countries, including oil producers, Saudi Arabia and Iran. And so together, BRICS economy is now potentially bigger than that of G7. It's not a military alliance, but it is the strength of a productive economy. And I mean productive, means useful things that ultimately decides power. So power is shifting to multipolarity. This is the context of the present Middle East. Gaza is this crisis in the Middle East, Gaza-Israel crisis. US's proxy in Europe, the corrupt Ukrainian oligarchy, has effectively lost the war against Russia they provoked at the behest of the United States. And now Hamas has exposed the weakness of the other US proxy, Israel, that lacks a coherent, constructive national ideology. Its founding ideology of Zionism is dying with each passing generation. The United States last Wednesday vetoed 2 UN security resolutions, one introduced by Russia calling for an immediate ceasefire, which was vetoed by the US, UK, and France because it did not specifically mention Hamas. Well, because they've declared Hamas to be terrorist. How could you do it? The other resolution was by Brazil calling for a humanitarian pause in the fighting in Gaza, and it condemned attacks on civilians by all sides. To presumably it included Hamas, although this is not a equal fight, as the others preceding me have pointed out. Israeli Air Force is bombing defenseless population in Gaza as we meet today. Children are dying, women are dying, men are dying. Biden has given $100 billion to Ukraine to fight Russia. And now another $100 billion is asked by his administration to help Ukraine and Israel, which already gets the highest US military assistance. But Israel faces the Hezbollah forces on its northern border, backed by Iran. Israeli forces are not likely prepared for a true front war. Unlike 67, we'll see what happens in the coming days. Biden may lose the election next year if the war expands and the US gets involved in the Middle East or Europe with ground forces. Even otherwise, anti-war movement is already growing, is bound to grow further. In London, there were 300,000 in a demonstration. In Europe, elsewhere, thousands. In the United States also, as has been pointed out. Israel is no longer popular among the US youth, despite propaganda and the media and the US leaders' constant lies, both Democrats and Republicans. El-Sisi, the dictator in Egypt, and Jordanian King Abdullah may fall. They are both compliant regimes of the US, or their regimes be at least destabilized. So Biden is trying to restrain Netanyahu, who in any case is not confident of his ground forces. So the several $1 trillion to bring US out of the Great Recession of 2008 and 9 has already led to inflation and impoverished 2/3 of US population. Ukraine and Israel wars will accelerate US decline. That decline parallels the decline of Israel, the last of the settler colonial country founded on racist ideology in the middle of last century. So I come to my conclusion. I just want to refer you to the Thomas Friedman opinion in New York Times a couple of days ago. He's an influential columnist who supports Israel's invasion of Gaza to destroy Hamas, as he says. Everybody in the imperialist wants to destroy Hamas. He's wrong. Hamas cannot be destroyed, as it represents the will of the Palestinian people opposed to oppression. They may not like Hamas, but as long as somebody fights against that oppression, they will have support. When PLO gave up, Hamas was born. If Hamas dies, something else will be born. Friedman also says the settlements into the West Bank must stop, or else Israel's future is in doubt. He's right about that. Israel's future is in doubt. If Israel stopped expanding, a two-state solution could be achieved. He argues. Now he's arguing for a two-state solution. And things will be stable for Israel. But this imperialist opinion maker, Friedman, misses the main point. Israel cannot stop expansion and be a Zionist state at the same time, for then it would have to be a secular democracy. That is, democracy with equal rights for all, including Palestinian Arabs. It further would mean Israel will have to vacate all the Palestinian territories acquired at least since this 1967 war. Settlers will assassinate any Israeli leader who did that. As you see, they did to Ishtiaq Rabin. And Israel politics has only consistently moved further right over time. So Israel is doomed as its backer. The US weakens further, which is the only real possibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to have a discussion now. And I want to remind people that this is not just a Q&A for the speakers, but you can express your opinions, refer to other people's comments. This is more of an open discussion. So if you would raise your hand, I will moderate the discussion and call on people, but it's going to sort of it's going to be less directed towards the speakers and more towards everybody else. Before we do, a couple of things I want to do. First of all, I just want to make a few announcements about upcoming programs. Next week, we're going to have, continuing the discussion on Gaza, Nora Barrows-Friedman of the Electronic Intifada, electronicintifada.net, which is one of the best sources of up-to-date news and analysis of what's going on in the Middle East and in Gaza. So that's next week is Nora Barrows-Friedman. The following week is Jyoti Brar from the World Anti-Imperialist Platform and the Communist Party of Great Britain, CPGBML. She's actually a world political figure within the anti-imperialist and communist movement, and she'll be speaking on the theory of the imperialist pyramid. Following that, on November 12th, we have Is the U.S. Headed for Low-Intensity Civil War? Our speaker will be Al Sargis, and he'll be talking about some of the activities of the right in the U.S. organizing at this time. And then November 19th, we have the Monroe Doctrine after 200 years. The speaker will be Mark Albertson. So this is the anniversary of the Monroe Doctrine, and he'll be speaking about that. So before we go into the Q&A, I'm just going to shift it over and ask Roger to show his slides to kind of give us a little bit of invigoration here about resistance. So Roger, if you would please share your screen, you can unmute yourself and show your slides if you can. Roger. Okay, okay, you're unmuted. Go ahead and share your screen. And
I'm going to pass that one.
Okay, all right. Okay, so we're going to shift over to the discussion. And again, raise your hand, click on the reactions button on the lower part of your screen and raise your questions or your comments. And I'm going to start off with Jean. If you would go ahead, Jean, please go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
I believe
You're unmuted. Go
I've
ahead.
been muted now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I want to, in addition to being a member of the planning committee here, I'm the president of the local chapter of Veterans for Peace. And I want to make a statement here from the perspective of Veterans for Peace, which has issued a statement on the conflict, on the crisis in Gaza. Veterans for Peace is an educational and humanitarian organization dedicated to the abolishment of war. As a global organization of military veterans and allies with over 140 chapters worldwide, we affirm our greater responsibility to serve the cause of world peace and global justice. To this end, we work with others to increase public awareness of the causes and consequences of war and restrain our governments from intervening directly and indirectly in the internal affairs of other nations. Now, applying these principles to the current crisis in Gaza, we join with the global calls for a ceasefire, de-escalation, and justice for Palestinians. We join with the majority of the American people in opposing the Biden administration policy of providing military and diplomatic support for the expansionist apartheid regime in Israel. The most recent polling, which was October 18th and 19th, indicates that 66% of Americans agree that, quote, the U.S. should call for a ceasefire and de-escalation of violence in Gaza. The U.S. should leverage its close diplomatic relationship with Israel to prevent further violence and civilians' deaths. And we further support the coming National March on Washington to Free Palestine on Saturday, March 4th, with the slogans, "No more U.S. aid to Israel," "Lift the siege on Gaza now." And I would like to further just mention here, or stress, that justice for Palestine means more than just leaving the Palestinians alone, because they have been wounded. There need to be reparations there. and there needs to be justice, which means ensuring basic human rights of life, dignity, employment, education for the Palestinians. There need to be reparations for what the U.S. and Israel has done, and remind people that with the end of the apartheid regime in South Africa, they required a long, difficult process of truth and reconciliation. And the wounds which have been caused by this Israeli war on Gaza is going to require the similar kind of truth and reconciliation for the future. And with that, thank you. And you can read the full statement of Veterans for Peace on our website, veteransforpeace.org. Thank you.
Okay, Gene, if you would drop that on into the chat, a link, people can find that. Next is Michael Karsh, so please go ahead. You're unmuted.
Yeah, yeah, you talked about how Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the dictator of Egypt, could be going down soon with our going down and supporting him. One thing I heard about Egypt is that it's joining BRICS, even though it should be our ally. Have you heard anything about that?
No, Egypt is not presently in the list of countries, but potential. That could happen. That could happen because I think this economic bloc is rising alternate blocs, and even those who are under control of the United States are trying to see if there's an alternate to it. So no, I don't know specifically about Egypt. Egypt is not in the current list of 6 countries that are to be added, that have been accepted in BRICS.
Right, but there are more countries that are applying to become accepted, and Egypt, I think, is one of them.
Yes.
Egypt is kind of in a bind in a way, because although the leadership of the country is aligned with the US, the population is in support of the Palestinians. And as far as the Rafah crossing, that has been the only crossing from Gaza out of Gaza, that's not into Israel, but it's into Egypt. And the plan for evacuating the people in Gaza from the north, 1 million to go to the south and then go out of the Rafah border. Egypt has not allowed that to happen for a number of reasons. One, they can't handle 1 million refugees. Their economy is not doing well, but also they understand that Israel would never let them back into Gaza. I mean, so the idea is not to make more refugees who have the right of return to get, anyway, I think I made my point.
There's also a political, you're right, Janet, but there's also a political reason that Jordan doesn't want any more Palestinian refugees, and neither does Egypt. Oh my goodness, the Palestinians are anti-imperialists. Some of them are communists. In 1970, the PLO came very close to seizing state power in Jordan.
Okay, next is Peter, and I want to encourage people to jump in. Feel free to jump in. Think of this more as a discussion like we have oftentimes after our speaker, after we go on off recording, the way that Janet, Sharon just jumped in and Raj just jumped in. But let's go with Peter. If you want to go ahead and raise question, comment, please.
Yeah, thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think it's also, there's been a lot of discussion, the the events of the last number of days, and then the long history, 100 century of history leading up to today where we are. But I think it's also important to look at the broader picture. I think this was raised just briefly, the broader geostrategic picture of what's going on, because as always, just one event in Gaza has repercussions far, far beyond that. And, we've already seen a lot of those repercussions. There's been attacks on US bases in Syria. There's been attacks. There's been 3 missiles shot by Yemen towards Israel. There's besides just popular demonstrations, actually state actors that are getting involved. Israel, of course, bombed the airport in Damascus. Russia then responded by saying, I think a lot of people miss this. This is really, really important. Putin said, "Hey, we've got our own navy in Black Sea, and we have MiG-31 MiG-31s with Kinjal missiles, which are supersonic missiles that fly at about Mach 10 and have a range of about 2,000 kilometers. So our Kinjal missiles, which cannot be stopped by any anti-air defense, they are within range of your 2 aircraft carrier strike groups right off of Israel. So there's all kinds of power plays going on, and certainly a lot of people are really concerned about, obviously the UN being one and Russia being the other, concerned about this spreading and becoming an entire Mideast or even broader war. And of course, that again, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, that's entirely different military equation than Hamas. Hamas being just really a kind of insurgent guerrilla force, whereas Hezbollah is actually a real army with tens of thousands of missiles, many of them actually precision-guided missiles. So I mean, there's and that's the main fear, of course, of Israel, is that Hezbollah becomes involved and they have to open a second front in the north of Israel. So I understand people's perception of, this totally unbalanced contest between the Israeli military and Hamas, and basically just rolling over Hamas and killing civilians. But if this becomes a broader war, then suddenly the Israeli military becomes far more compromised, and they have to actually open at least 2 fronts and maybe 3 against Syria. I mean, there's all kinds of potential there, and I think whenever we talk about really anything going on in Israel, you have to always look at all the other forces and how they're lining up. And this has been the first time ever in history that I know of that the president of the US has wanted to talk to leaders in the Middle East, and they all told him to go pound sand. I mean, go screw, because they haven't. Biden had absolutely no proposal other than forcing Palestinians out of Gaza into Egypt. I mean, that was his proposal. So they basically told him, we have nothing to talk about. This has never happened before, to my knowledge, that the American president has been humiliated by Middle Eastern leaders that won't talk to him. But who are they talking to? Everybody is talking to Putin and Xi. Putin got on the phone. He talked to Netanyahu. He talked to leaders of every Middle East nation in the first day or 2 of this crisis. So that gives you an idea of how the real world has really changed dramatically in terms of political influence and who's going to negotiate a peace. So anyway, I just thought it'd be interesting, kind of
interesting point.
Just a quick point to Peter's thing is, I think internally, Israel is politically fragile. because its politics is very fractured, and the right wing, further and further right wing, is getting control of the government. And I don't think Israel can fight a two-front war. I agree with you. So the fragility, political fragility of a regime that is based on racism and a settler colonial racism, which is 20th century actually did away with that. And it's the last one that remains. So I think that's, and you have correctly added the multipolarity, the power of Russian military and the economic power of China are a very big factor, and they're together. Thank you.
Let me just,
Richard.
let me just
Go
clarify
ahead.
one thing. Hamas is a political party. It's not the whole thing. That it has a military arm, but in general, it's not. The whole thing is not a military entity.
Okay, Richard, if you would go ahead.
Yeah. In some sense, I think that this is sort of a. I mean, it's a good presentation. It's a good discussion, but it's kind of restricted. The point is, to me, it seems, is that first off, we've gotten a very nice history of Gaza and Israel and all that, but the issue really is, what do we do about this? First, secondly, that Gaza and Israel are just I'm sorry, it's just one region that leaves out Ukraine, it leaves out Syria, it leaves out subversive things that are going on. For example, in Peru, the United States is now in Peru supporting right-wing dictator. It's certainly after Cuba. It's certainly after Venezuela. So it's, in some sense, we've artificially restricted this discussion, and really the question is, what do we do about this? And nobody has really, I mean, aside from holding rallies, which have been going on now for 40 or 50 years, that basically rallies don't seem to be cutting it. So now we need to really discuss what works and what doesn't work. And I'll just leave it at that, and I'll come back later.
Well, I was on
Okay.
a phone call with 400 trade unionists last week, and people are organizing for resolutions in their unions, talking to fellow workers. Is the short answer in my mind. I mean, I'm glad you raised it, Richard, but the short answer is, what do? We continue to educate people about U.S. imperialism and that the United States is on the wrong side.
But Sharon, I appreciate what you're saying, and I've gotten stuff from Labor Against War, or the reformation of that. But in point of fact, the labor penetration in this country is now around 10%, and that's coming. And I'm out there trying to get more workers, get more people involved. I mean, because that to me is the first point of being able to express stuff like this. So somehow we need to get off. We need to get off the campus and into rural America, if you will. I'm sorry.
Okay, next is Elazar. Elazar, if you would.
Quickly, can I just, I posted a link to a YouTube of Shahid Bolson, who actually, he usually addresses the Muslim people of the world, but it's broader than that. And what I posted, he addresses what he thinks should be done. And it's amazing. I think you must watch it. I'll post it again.
Thank you. Elazar, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know. I can't hear myself very well right now, but I'll do the best I can. my characterization of Hamas might be different than the speakers. Part of the history is left out that the Mossad and the Shin Bet kickstarted and funded Hamas to offset the secular PLO.
That's
Now,
true.
let me finish and do not interrupt, please, because I'm 90 years old. I'll lose my train of thought. By the way, Sharon made a very excellent presentation. I would just like to finish my thought. So I consider when the people are oppressed the way the Palestinians are, some of the tactics used to fight oppression are terrorists. It's natural. There was a movement in pre-revolutionary Russia, Narodna Volya. The revolutionary position was we don't counsel individual terrorism, but mass working class and allied operations. But we defend these people charged with terrorism against the main enemy, the Tsarist state or the American imperialists. I feel the same way. Now, another thing left out is the early organizing of the Communist Party of Palestine in the Haifa refineries and the railroads. There was an alliance between the Arab and Jewish workers together, and they fought. They never would call the British or the Haganah. They had their own worker defense committees themselves that were both Arab and Hebrew speaking. Now, what destroyed that unity at the key at Haifa refineries was the extreme right Jewish Irgun found Arab workers at the plant gate. This is 1947, just before partition, who are just there to try to get jobs, and they shot and killed them. It led to Arabs storming into the plant and murdering 34 Jews. Some of the Arab workers did defend the Jews, and on the railroads, they effectively prevented a massacre of Jews. But the Histadrut, its goal was to poison the possibility of Jewish Arab workers' possibility. The original Communist Party position in Palestine was for a multi-ethnic state, but centered around a Arab Jewish working class leadership and integrated into a socialist federation of the Near East. Now that broke down, and so we're left with this horror. Now, another thing left out, I don't know if this is correct, but Iran has released information that a large contingent of Israeli military that opposes the government assisted Hamas in this operation. I don't know if it's correct, but I think I can send the information. First, I'll send it to Raj or something. He can send it to everyone.
Okay.
I just received this. So very interesting. So my approach is the main enemy is U.S. imperialism. Israel is a sucker. By placing them there, both the British and later the Americans, and unfortunately Stalin also early supported the establishment of the Zionist state, created a death trap for the Jews. Thank you. I see Raj shaking his head.
No, just quickly, I'll just say that you yourself said the point was to build a socialist Israel with both Arab and that was what Stalin hoped could happen, but that didn't turn out. That doesn't mean, in hindsight, yes, I agree, mistake, but the Jews were also traumatized, and at that time, a lot of Jews. So this is a complicated story.
Okay, next up is Karen.
Hi, thank you very much. And I really appreciate your comments, Elazar. I've read a little bit about that, and I just want to say that when the railroad workers, Arabs and Jews, went on strike together, it was during the 30s, during the war by the Arab nations against Palestinian Jews. So that was really remarkable. And it was the History that pulled them apart in the name of nationalism. And that's why I think it is so critical that we fight every aspect of nationalism. And that means that we also condemn the suffering of Israeli Jewish people. And we condemn the politics of Hamas. They were organized in order to counter the PLO and a secular movement. And I think we need to rebuild that kind of unity that Al-Azhar talked about. So I think that anybody in the world has the responsibility to criticize politics that further divide us. And, you know, we don't have to be in the middle of a burning house to say what needs to be done. So that's kind of, I know that's not a very popular viewpoint at this time, but I think it's critical. Thank you.
Comments on that? Anybody?
I think the question of nationalism and can you just have a workers' revolution combining everybody works once in a while. It has worked at times, but in this situation of imperialism, it's very difficult. This has been the lesson of history, but the oppressed must be given every right to revolt. And that's the point. I mean, targeting Hamas, calling Hamas a sectarian and religious sectarian and terrorist is one way they're trying to justify oppression of Palestinians. But oppressed have every right to resist, no matter how they resist. We have to support that.
Okay, Jim, if you would unmute, please.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, in reference to Hamas coming into being, I came across the video last night it was on Twitter, and it shows Netanyahu telling the cabinet that very thing. We have to keep funding Hamas. I was stunned that evidence exists, but not surprising in a way. I got an email from Global Research, and they're saying that Israel airburst bomb is what struck the hospital, El Ali Hospital. That's just right now rumor. That's just one source. If it's true, and they got it from the United States, I think that becomes really huge leverage in terms of pointing out the war criminality of the United States in this operation. And I think that essentially Biden is right on the edge of doing an LBJ, being forced to resign. I can't imagine the ruling class are really happy about half the planet mobilizing against the United States. And Biden may be the one that has to take the hit. And the question is, who's going to be in there in his place? And the Democrats have set it up so there's no primaries. So they're going to have to rebuild from scratch. But I could see Biden going down, really. This is even worse than what LBJ was dealing with, because the war criminal label is getting more and more real in people's minds, and that will be less easy to tolerate being associated with that. And I think as long as the global South continues to be mobilized, I think we can make great strides in those directions. Thank you.
Okay, next, Norma, please.
Hi, hello, everybody. I've told you everything I know, except here's this thing that came up in my mind. You know, I emigrated to Israel in 1965 on the, Stalin said they supported it and so forth, and I supported anything they did came out of Soviet Union. So my husband got enthusiastic over getting away from this here. We lived in Chicago at the time and going elsewhere. And he said, let's go to Israel. And he's not even Jew, wasn't even Jewish. Anyway, but he had the principles that made our relationship go on. I tried to look at all the things that sent us back. We were there 9.5 months. Actually, when we got off the plane, which had been diverted to Cyprus because they wouldn't let a non-LL plane fly into Israel. And we waited about 9 hours to get the plane to Israel, and landed at a time when people who had come from Sasa up north, Svat, had gone back home. And we had to take a taxi. Anyway, the experience was very illuminating as to the difficulty of building socialism. How do you commit to something where you don't have communication and understanding together about everyday matters? And we didn't. They were speaking Hebrew almost entirely. So the idea of educating people in a revolutionary society is so important. Anyway, the degree of alienation that went on, as I said, when we got off the plane, he said, "No, this isn't going to work." And I made him stay because I had made such an investment. It took me a year to get us located at the kibbutz and to do what we talked about, what we had in mind. It's very difficult to commit to communist struggle. Very difficult. And we have to communicate that with people. You don't do it overnight. And there's all kinds of mind changing and of knowing things that goes into it.
Okay, Anne, if you would please unmute and.
Sure. I'm in basic agreement with all of the speakers, but I want to express a little bit of what I'm seeing around me, which is probably quite different from what people here are seeing. Yeah. And I'll give you a couple of examples. One is that we were unable to pass the most pablum-like resolution at our Central Labor Council. And not only were we unable to pass it, but there was a level of passionate anger at the people that were trying to pass this resolution that I have rarely seen, particularly in labor union contexts. And it occurred to me, I think it was Janet's talk about how history doesn't ever begin with the event. Well, passion certainly does. And so I have, the other thing that happened to me was a old friend. Basically, I was expressing some concern. I wasn't expressing politics. She knows my politics and basically threw me out of her office in a very angry way. So I have to say that what's going on in Texas is a very angry feeling about us, in part, and that I've heard stuff said about DSA that I have never heard before, about how out of step they are with the needs of the. It's very similar to what I saw about 9/11. And it's very similar to what I've seen in Texas about Ukraine. And I'm just saying that very good, decent people who would call themselves progressive, at least here, will not listen to anybody's history right now. Are operating from, they are basically living the Holocaust. And I think we have to understand that and figure out a way to talk to people. And I don't think it's educating them. I think that's the worst thing we can try to do in some ways. So I'm looking for, and that's really why I came in a way, is looking for what do we do in a situation where, like most of the time, a lot of our views are very unpopular, even among very good people.
Can I ask people to comment specifically on Ann's before we move on with the people who have their hands raised? Could I have people jump in and address her question, please?
Yeah, I want to do that. May
Okay,
I?
Raj, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think it is the power of the nightmare. You know, the Holocaust was a nightmare. And that nightmare combined with liberal racism, this is a strange combination. Liberal racism works differently than the overt racism of the conservatives. That's identifiable, clear, you know what they stand for, they're up in your face about that. Liberal racism is basically presumes you're superior to another person, and you're going to civilize them up to your level. And the nightmare of the Jews suffered, which the United States was not in sympathy with. Most of the US politicians were not. They're indifferent to Jewish suffering. Then, between Israel and the United States, they're both using that for their purposes. And how do you get people? And there's tremendous media, the industry, whole industry of movies and everything, the propaganda, as it is so captivating that it's very difficult to take that position. That's what the Israel lobby is all about. So this is very difficult. This is like the myth of the British had created. Okay, they created such myths and they had employed sociologists, etc. But I think the other point is that somebody here pointed out, I think it was maybe Janet who said that, quoting Malcolm X about conscience that Martin Luther King wanted to use.
Stokely Carmichael.
Yeah, Stokely Carmichael versus so it wouldn't work because people have no conscience. Well, that's not quite true. People do have conscience. That he wasn't right about that. But that method works along with materialism. And the materialism part of it was, in India, Gandhi awakened a huge number of people. So you could use passive resistance and nonviolence to basically delegitimize the British. Here, it's a special condition where it is a small number of people, just like the Jews couldn't do that. Jews themselves in Nazi Germany couldn't use passive resistance. Same thing with Gazans and Palestinians in general. That's the problem.
So can I just want to jump in and make a quick comment, and in response, I think that one of the things that's very important in these situations is to really put forward your position clearly and aggressively. And it's really a lot of this is a battle over momentum. And when people start talking about this stuff, especially when they start weaponizing what happened to the Jews in World War II and the Holocaust, we have to come forward and we have to really point out that what's taking place today in Palestine is a genocide. There are 2 million people in the Gaza Strip, over 1 million children, cutting off water, electricity, medical supplies, bombing, hundreds and hundreds of children being bombed. We have to go in there and go toe to toe with these people and really not allow what happened to Jews or anybody else for that matter in the Holocaust to get the initiative about what's, set the narrative and the framing of what's going on. Okay. Other points. Janet, you wanted to say something? Janet?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I wanted to say something about that because I found what Raj had to say very, very compelling. But honestly, I think that just like I think you're right that we have to talk about the current situation rather than trying to educate people about history right now. I think that's the compelling argument. But I also find that people will not listen to you unless you express what I do not want to express, which is my horror at what Hamas did to Israel. And that's, I think, what you're hearing a little bit, even among this group, is that people will not listen if you do not in some way express that outrage. And I don't want to do that because I agree with what's being said politically. I don't think it's equivalent. I think it's a whole different question. So, but I just want to say that.
Can people comment on that, please, directly?
Yeah, I'd like to. I think that when it comes to one-on-one in particular, somebody like that, it's good to start with some empathy because they are feeling some pain. And so I'm just, in thinking out loud saying, I'm sorry for your pain about what happened during the Holocaust. In an empathetic way, not with feeling. And either then just that's it, and don't feed the fire is one of the things. But you could also say, but I differ from what's happening now. And maybe not even have to go into detail or push anything on somebody like that. But, it's like people have to be somewhat open-minded in order to hear arguments different from their own. And that's my suggestion.
Other comments on this particular question? Richard, do you want to go ahead?
Well, I was kind of hoping that Anne, and maybe she will. Like Anne and I had this conversation a couple of days ago, so I know what she's where she's coming from, and I agree with a lot of what she's saying. I was kind of hoping that she would elaborate a little bit on what the resolution was and what the, because it was really stunning when I heard this, what the resolution was at the Central Labor Council and why it was being opposed. And I'll just leave it back to Anne to see if she'll elaborate that without names, of course.
Sure. I think it was particularly interesting because the Central Labor Council in Texas is composed of African American, Latino, and white participants. So a few of the participants Jewish, of the white participants, and very devout Jews, really. And I can tell you that there was, in some ways, the Latinos were not. Were kind of split. The African Americans and the on the council and the who were representing really predominantly African American unions, of course, like bus drivers in Austin, and the people who were Jewish absolutely opposed the resolution. With the African American participants, it was, and a number of white trades people. And then there was a fairly strong progressive group that were for it. The resolution itself said the whereas ended up with humanitarian aid, allowing humanitarian aid into Gaza, and a ceasefire. No mention of U.S. weapons, no acknowledgement of Israeli suffering, and civilian suffering in general. That was basically the resolution. It did have one word in one of the parts whereases that was on occupied Palestine or something like that. And that was what threw some of the people in the group. But there was everything from, this is a holy war, we are not going to take sides in a holy war. There was the persecution of Jews. There was, this is anti-Semitic resolution.
Okay.
There was also, the one other thing I have to name is the Biden administration. The Biden administration is this is the quote. I would disagree, but this is the quote. The Biden administration is the most pro-labor politician we've ever had. And we as union people have to support him.
Oh, God.
And that was very strong.
Okay, Elazar, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just want to answer Janet Coburn's question about this Iranian report. I sent it to Raj and asked him by email, but I'm going to read it off. I sent it to her on chat, but I doubt I did it correctly. It's called Rebellious Israeli Officers Provided Hamas with Crucial Intel Report. It's https://new. New the cradle. There's a dot. Oh, I don't know. Is there a way I could show it and someone could copy it?
I'm doing it right now, and I'll put it in the chat.
Okay,
Thank you,
thank
Raj.
you. Thank you.
Thank
Good.
you.
I want to make another point. I thought Sharon was attempting very well to give a class analysis of what was going on. So my position is, with respect to Hamas, yes, they did mix a military action, which I support 1,000%, with individual terrorism against civilians and children and kidnap people. I don't support that. However, if they were brought to trial, it's a duty bound for revolutionaries to form defense committees on their behalf and say we criticize the methodology, but we understand that it stems from the total genocidal oppression of the Palestinian people by Israel. Thank you.
Okay, Gene, if you would go ahead and unmute yourself, please. Gene.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted.
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yeah, and thanks for this discussion. I kind of wanted to shift gears a little bit. In part, I appreciated the comment about LBJ, and I remember this statement: I will not seek, nor will I accept the nomination of my party for president. And I'm waiting to hear that from Biden. And if he would say that, that would raise him considerably, in my own estimation. The other thing I wanted to say is a little bit more serious, though, and that has to do with the fact that Israel has nuclear weapons. It's not has never endorsed the non-nuclear arms proliferation treaty, the NMP, but and will not admit that it has nuclear weapons. But most people believe that it does. And the question is, well, the only reason you have nuclear weapons basically is to use them. And I think it's reasonable to wonder what will happen if there's more action against Israel that it doesn't like. Will it then attack people, other forces with these nuclear weapons? So I just wanted to raise that issue and see if what people think about that. Thank you.
Okay, I just wanted to make another quick comment on Ann's question. I think it's important for us to recognize that it's not just, people with good intentions who are trying to elevate the attacks on civilians to the same level as what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. It's a political battle with very clear political lines, and it's part of the overall strategy of the Democratic Party to equalize these two things and to frame it as just a fight between two sides. It's a political point that the Democratic Party and many in the trade union movement are supporting in doing this. And again, I want to emphasize that what we have to do is to confront it, and confront it aggressively and clearly, and really point out that, you know, what's wrong with that, which I think people have brought out today. So I'm all in favor of, you know, going on the offensive against that kind of thing, and not allowing them to just have the stage. So other people want to comment on
Yeah,
anything else? We're getting near the end. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I want to
Raz.
say that I pasted Elazar's link because he wouldn't paste the whole article, it's too long. Pasted the link to the article he refers to, and I believe there is some basis for it. I think the Israeli army does not want to fighting in Gaza because it'll take huge losses. Its soldiers do not like to do what the Nazi soldiers were asked to do, and I wouldn't call Israel a Nazi state. So, you know, it is a modern state. It is racist, but it is not Nazi in the sense. But I think the point here is that what is changing the world is the balance of forces. You never can convince the people. 55 years ago, I couldn't convince my co-workers and people in the neighborhood I lived in Chicago. I was an immigrant for 2 years in. I couldn't convince anybody that there was any justification for NLF, which they used to call Viet Cong, to fight for their independence, because they were communists, and in their mind, they were communists who were going to take over and they kill people, and they were unreasonable, and so they were so convinced. But it was the National Liberation Front struggle, and supported by Soviet Union and at that time China also, that crucially changed the balance of power. So this balance of power concept is very important, and balance of power is changing in the world. That is what is multipolarity. Some people confuse it with saying, oh, you think socialism will come through it? No, it's a balance of force between various powers that allows oppressed and the exploited to get some room, to struggle. More room than it would be otherwise. Under unipolarity, that is not possible. Under multipolarity, the space opens up.
Yeah,
And
well,
I think that's what I think.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Okay, Sharon, go ahead.
Oh,
Sharon, unmute.
Thank you. I just wanted to add something that is interesting to me. So there is something called the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington, D.C., which I had never heard of until I saw somebody from there speaking on CNN. I think it was yesterday or the day before. And what he had to say was that Hamas wants a ground war in Gaza because they are contending for leadership of the whole Palestinian people. They're contending with the PLO, and they believe that, if I understood him correctly, that fighting house to house with the IDF will lead them to achieve that. And so his point was that Israel is walking into a trap, or, going along with what Hamas really wants. And I thought that was interesting. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Janet, go ahead.
yeah. So Hamas told the people in Gaza not to try to go south, to leave through the Rafah border, to stay in place. And the people in Gaza basically have the feeling of give me liberty or give me death. They do not want to leave their land. And so Hamas has been preparing for decades, perhaps, for this kind of a battle if the Israelis came in to their the Gaza territory. They know their way around, and they're underground. And anyway, apparently the Israeli military, the people in the military are not prepared to fight this kind of a battle. So they would be destroyed, and there would be a lot killed and all that. Anyway, so I also wanted to address, I can't remember who brought up the nuclear weapon. Was it Richard? Anyway,
Jean.
Sorry?
Jean,
right. So yeah, Israel has nuclear weapons, but if they use them like against Hezbollah, it's going to backfire. It's like their own part of it's so close to their own land. It's going to affect their own land. They're not going to use it in Gaza because it is their, well, you know, they consider it their land, but it's maybe well, France helped Israel build the nuclear weapons, but the US then came in, and I think they administer it for them or something like that. And to me, Israel is this one big military, American military base. And so the nuclear weapons would be more to send to Russia, not you know, far away from Israel. Anyway.
okay, so we're getting near the end here. I'm going to ask Jean, and Raj will be the last person. Jean, go ahead. Please raise your unmute and make your comment.
Okay, on nuclear weapons, again, I think it is a worry. And the worry about that they might use them against Iran, I think, is one concern. And because there's a lot of tension there. But again, you know, I support. The United States has refused to endorse the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which I think is a crime against humanity. But that's just kind of a side issue right now. But again, this idea of the rebellious officers, you know, the Israeli military refusing to fight, that's not new. I mean, think back about the Vietnam War, and when American militaries not only refused to fight, they used to shoot their own officers and desert and all these kinds of things. So I just wanted to remind people about that chapter in history. Thank you.
I think we're gonna get thrown off YouTube at any moment here. Raj, you've got the last word.
Yeah, I don't think nuclear weapons are going to be used by Netanyahu, because that'll be complete self-annihilation following what will happen to them. So also United States will not permit, and Netanyahu is ultimately not free of what Biden says. Biden wouldn't want that. And attack on Iran would unleash fury all across. So that will destabilize the entire imperialist order. I don't think that's going to happen. Possibility is very low. Also on Sharon's reading this in the website of US Arab Association, if Hamas only has 2,000 trained fighters, from what I know. So it would have to be a people's war concept. In that sense, do they have all the Palestinians, which Janet said they are determined to fight? If they're willing to engage in that, that could be the strategy. But without actually outside support, they cannot succeed. So it will have to be a lot more for them to succeed. I don't know if that's their intention to go there, but it was a move that has certainly made it very difficult. I mean, it basically exposed Israel's inner rot. Associated with this is American inner rot, systems inner rot, not the people. Of course, people are never rot. It's the inner rot of the systems, both places. And I think we're in uncharted territory for now. But that's about all I can say about that.
Okay, so I want to ask everybody to come back next week. Nora Barrows-Friedman will be speaking from the Electronic Intifada. I'm going to contact her and let her know some of the questions that came up during today's discussion and ask her if she'd comment on them as part of her presentation and discussion next week. Go to our website, ICSSmarks.org, and sign up for our email notifications, view past programs, or just send us a message with anything that you're interested in hearing about. So with that, we're going to stop the recording. And thank you very much. It was a very good discussion. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Thank you for the presenters for presenting your ideas and kicking off the discussion. And stay tuned.
Institute for the Critical Study of Society at the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library receives no corporate funding, nor do we have any paid staff. We rely on the support of working class folks that share our commitment to the socialist legacy of Karl Marx. We continue to need funds to meet necessary expenses. Since we can no longer pass the hat at our in-person forums, please send contributions to our treasurer, either online via PayPal or by check. The PayPal ID is ICSS Sunday, SUNDAY, @yahoo.com, and the name is Richard Fallenbaum. And checks may be made out to Richard Fallenbaum and sent to him at 1225 Nielsen Street, Berkeley, California, 94706. Fallenbaum is spelled Fallenbaum. To donate directly to the Marxist Library, send a check to the Nebo Proctor Marxist Library at 6501 Telegraph Avenue, Oakland, California, 94609, or directly or donate online at www.paypal.me/npml. For information, write to npml at marxistlibr.org, and the website is marxistlibr.org.